Hello everyone and welcome to my video analysis of Killzone 3. The game doesn't need any presentation, so I'll just summarize what the following video will be about. This demonstration is based on a demo preview code featuring a brief but rather intense section of the game. You will get to learn the move controls, of course, and you will also watch plenty of shooting action. But don't be afraid of spoilers, as I avoided filming the most significant moments of the demo. So relax and keep watching. Okay, let's start with the basics. As you would expect, to shoot you pull the analog trigger at the bottom of the move. To reload, you can press the square button or execute a quick flick of the wrist like you see me doing here. You can flick either clockwise or anti-clockwise, and you don't really need to make too big of a gesture. Because of this, gesture-based reloading doesn't affect aiming that much and you can't trigger it by accident. It works very well and I prefer it over the square alternative as I don't have to move the thumb around. To zoom in, you press the L2 button, which I'll discuss in more detail shortly. Before getting there, it's worth mentioning that zoomed aiming is based on a detached iron sight solution, allowing for a non-disruptive transition from normal to zoomed aim, meaning you don't lose the target in the process. Differently from MAG, the same detached solution applies to scoped aiming as well, sniper rifle included. In this case, you can also toggle between two magnification options by pressing up on the D-pad. Notice how it zooms exactly where you are pointing. Whoops. Sorry, my bad. Some heavy machine guns retain the on-screen cursor when zooming in, while other heavy weapons do not, like this rocket launcher here. These differences are shared between DualShock 3 and Move controls, but there is an exception. Whoops. Sorry again. The WASP rocket launcher you are seeing here is the exception I was talking about. When zooming in with the move controls, the scope remains fixed in the middle of the screen and you get to operate a cursor within it. With the DualShock 3 instead, the cursor is of course fixed, so you move both the cursor and the camera at the same time. In both cases, aiming is aided by the WASP very own lock-on system, which allows to easily hit targets with both its firing modes. More specifically, when firing from the hip, it unleashed a swarm of missiles towards the locked target. When zooming in, it fires a single but rather powerful mortar strike. When using either the Move or the DualShock 3, zoom function can be set to hold, toggle or adaptive, which is a brand new option. This is how zoom works when set to hold. Just look at my left finger at the bottom. Pretty simple affair. And this is how it works when set to toggle, again nothing new. Now the adaptive option is interesting in that it combines the above alternatives. Again pay attention to my finger below. Now I'm toggling. And now I'm holding. Both under the same setting. Very cool, huh? Moving on to lock assist, you get to choose between none, camera and crosshair. Let's see what this is all about. For starter, when no assist is selected, you get your usual Call of Duty-like snap to closest target upon zooming in system, which is in place when using the DualShock 3 as well. The cursor needs to be relatively close to the target to snap to it, of course. Now, with the crosshair lock assist, what you get upon zooming in is that both your aim and the camera snap to the closest target, highlighted by those orange corners, and they stick to it. You can't aim nor look anywhere else unless you unzoom. Interestingly, since hitting different body parts deals more or less damage, Even when locked, you still have the option to choose which body part to shoot at by literally selecting it by tilting the move. Pay close attention to how the dot jumps around the Helga's body here. This system works in scope view as well, allowing to follow distant targets even behind obstacles and pull off headshots quite easily. It also takes care of aiming mode, switching dynamically between normal and zoomed aim according to distance. The camera lock assist differs from the crosshair one in that it only locks the camera to the target, leaving the actual aiming to you. As you can see, I can't rotate the camera, which automatically keeps the target around the center of the screen, but I have free control over the cursor or the iron sight. Both assist systems automatically lock onto an enemy coming into view as long as you hold down the trigger, as you can see here as I turn to the right with the trigger already pulled. When multiple enemies are in view, both assists lock to the target which appears to be closer to the on-screen cursor when pulling the trigger. Now, if you are wondering if any of these assists are needed to do well in Killzone 3, well, they can help, but no, you don't really need them, as the aiming works perfectly regardless. Actually, depending on the situation, you might not want the camera to turn by itself. You can avoid that by simply tapping the trigger instead of holding it. That way you aim normally even with the assist on, but having to just think about that isn't really convenient in battle. So yeah, no assist is the way to go in my opinion. Crosshair assist is possible only on the easiest setting, by the way, the hardest ones allowing just for the camera lock. Of course, to get good results with an assist-free setup, you need to tweak the controls properly, and that brings us to the analysis of the bounding box, which here is referred to as the dead zone. Let's begin by taking a look at the dead zone width. Let's set it to the maximum. The blue banners I have applied here represent the outside areas of the dead zone. When cursor enters either areas, camera rotation begins in the corresponding direction. As you can see, it's quite a large of a dead zone. When setting the dead zone value to minimum instead, the turning area covers most of the screen. Camera acceleration occurring when traversing that area towards the edge of the screen is quite smooth, but more on that later. As for the dead zone height, the minimum setting is quite small, but the acceleration here isn't as smooth as with the dead zone width, so I advise to keep it fairly wide, but not too much. In fact, at the highest value, dead zone height is so large you need to point the move above or below the screen to actually trigger the rotation, losing the benefit of the cursor as an angle reference point. Unlike MAG, Killzone 3 doesn't allow to set dead zone values specific per aiming mode. These options only relate to the normal aim dead zone, the down the sights one margins being untouchable and quite wide, just like the scoped ones. As you can tell by the blue banners, you can see how big of a dead zone you are dealing with when zooming in. It's basically similar to the widest normal aim one. This means you will never suffer from severe unintentional camera rotations when zooming in, as the iron sight will usually appear within the respective dead zone, halting camera rotation. When zooming out though, you are more likely to experience camera drift, albeit Killzone 3 mitigates the issue somehow. More on that later. Back to the option screen, notice that sensitivity setting. Let's see what it does. Here is me moving the controller with the sensitivity at 50%. Here at 100%. and here at 0. Noticed any difference? I hope not, because there isn't any. What that sensitivity option refers to is actually the sensitivity of the tracking relative to camera rotation. Let's put it back to 0 and perform some turns. As you can see, camera rotation is painfully slow, even when angling the move as much as you see there at the bottom of the screen. With camera sensitivity set to max, I get impressive speed with less angle. That clarification out of the way, there are a couple of interesting things to say about how camera rotation was implemented. First of all, while camera rotation begins as soon as you point outside of the dead zone, its speed can be further adjusted even when the move is pointing outside of the screen. Notice how the camera rotation speed changes as I tilt the controller differently whilst pointing it beyond the right edge of the screen. This clever system allows for a greater control over camera speed. Now, to show you the second interesting characteristic of the camera rotation, I need to bring back the horizontal dead zone markers. Okay, now as I start rotating the camera, pay very close attention to what happens when I move the cursor back in the direction of the dead zone. Notice how the camera stops rotating while still outside of the bounding box. A bug? Not at all. Actually, this is a very clever solution to one of the issues related to this sort of camera control system. Of course, I don't know the details of how Guerrilla achieved this, but as you can see, it feels like the edges of the dead zone, in this case the right one, are dynamically extended beyond the original ones when the cursor travels back towards the center. Let me try to explain better. The red line indicates the current dynamic edge. Getting the cursor back into the dead zone, actually behind the middle of it, resets that edge. In fact, now the camera starts rotating as the cursor enters the blue area. Now let's start the rotation again and bring the cursor back enough to stop it. Boom, there. Let's bring the cursor closer to the middle of the dead zone and move it away from it. Boom, there. Let's move it into the dead zone, but not past the middle of it. Boom, there. New dynamic edge. Finally, moving it past the middle restores the original margin. What all of this dynamic edge mess achieves is rather simple. It basically allows you to stop camera rotation sooner than you could if you had to wait for the cursor to actually reach the dead zone. It's a very subtle thing for sure, but it greatly improves camera management, also mitigating the zoom out camera drift problem mentioned before, as you can stop the unintentional camera movement quickly. So now you might be wondering how you tweak the cursor sensitivity, since the sensitivity option we have seen before refers to the camera. Well, oddly enough, you can only do that at the end of the calibration process. The good news though is that you can check the results in real time as the cursor shows up on the screen. Yet I don't see why this screen couldn't be available right away via a dedicated option. Anyway, as you check the difference between various cursor sensitivity settings here, it's worth mentioning that the size of the dead zone is retained whatever the sensitivity. This is different from MAG, where changes in the cursor sensitivity affected the actual size of the bounding box. Back to the controls basics, melee attack can be performed exclusively by thrusting the move forward. Likely it is responsive and consistent enough you won't mind the forced waggling. Kills usually require 2 thrusts, as more brutal melees come in 2 phases. The range at which you can start a brutal melee is fairly generous. Check the inviting prompt here, so you don't need to get too close, and even if you do to the point of getting past your victim, you still have a chance to pull it off. That is, of course, as long as the target is not totally behind you. Besides the ammo unlimited pistol, you can carry 2 extra weapons in Killzone 3, more specifically a heavy weapon and a rifle. You can switch through the guns by tapping the triangle or by selecting them directly via the D-pad. Now let's compare how they behave when using the move and the DualShock 3. Guerrilla decided to remove upwards aim recoil when using the move, but they didn't stop there. As you can see, the on-screen cursor shakes quite a bit while shooting from the hip, which is not the case with the DualShock 3, which is conversely affected by aim recoil. A similar difference applies to zoomed aiming. In the case of rifles, aim recoil is minimal across both controllers when shooting down the sights. This is not the case when using machine guns. When firing from the hip, both controllers share the same differences exposed with the rifle. When aiming down the sights, though, aim recoil does affect the DualShock 3 shooting. Finally, as for the pistol, while there is a severe aim recoil when shooting with the DualShock 3, it doesn't really make a difference, since the fire rate is slow enough to let you shoot again only when the cursor falls back to the original position. In both cases, there is no recoil when aiming down the sights. One last difference is the cursor behavior when standing still. Here you don't see my hands as I've put the controller on a tripod to assure total stability. As you can see, the cursor trembles regardless along with the gun model, and to a same degree whatever the cursor sensitivity. The DualShock 3 cursor instead just oscillates around a bit. Perhaps it's an intentional compensation for the lack of aim recoil, or maybe not, but the instability of the move cursor does affect accuracy when shooting at stationary targets from a fixed position. More so when shooting from the hip, rather than from the sights, of course. For comparison, here you can see how the DualShock 3 deals with the same task. Interestingly, Killzone 3 offers the option to remove the cursor altogether, even when playing with the move. Of course, when using the DualShock 3, cursorless aiming is easier since you are always aiming at the center of the screen, but thanks to the way the gun model moves at the bottom of the screen, you get enough of a visual reference to achieve a fair enough accuracy with the move as well. Okay, a couple more basic things before we get to the final segment of this video. Grenades are thrown by pressing the L1 button and they fly in the direction of the on-screen cursor, and you can cook them, of course. To crouch, you use the main move button and you can set it to either toggle or hold. This also means you use the move button to stick to cover as well. Coming from the DualShock 3 configuration, which has the crouch cover function under the left hand, it feels unnatural at first, but that's ultimately for the best, as you quickly appreciate how easy it is to pull off your moves without having to fiddle with alternative controls or switch between toggle hold solutions. Finally, Killzone 3 introduced the ability to slide to cover, which is performed by holding down the crouch button while sprinting. To sprint, you hold down the L3 button. Calling it a slide cover function is not totally correct though, as you can actually slide anytime while running. There is also a clever catch, in that you can only slide on level or downhill ground. When running uphill, any attempt at sliding results in your character actually crouching. And there is more. Pay attention to what happens here when I trigger the slide right before the terrain starts to climb. The slide gets interrupted as I hit the bump. Moreover, you can also turn while sliding, at different angles depending on move orientation, which as a byproduct allows to perform cool slide and turn to cover maneuvers. By the way, there is an option to disable the cover system altogether if you like. And on a totally unrelated and disappointing note, Killzone 3 doesn't support the move in split screen at all. Check the text at the bottom of the screen. As with the cursor drifting, there is definitely some in this build, which was printed in November. It's generally minimal and ultimately negligible enough to go unnoticed unless you pay close attention, but a couple of times it occurred to me to end up with a despited cursor unwilling to get to the center of the screen even after multiple calibrations. Twisting the controller for a while minimized the issue thanks to the auto-fixing math I described in one of my tech videos, but to actually end this I had to eventually reset the controller. The magnetometer was off during this, by the way. Now, to finish this video with a spoiler-free bang, I have put together a montage which is some sort of an experiment. What I did was basically merge multiple playthroughs of the same section into one, so you get to appreciate how different each playthrough developed without having to watch all of them. That's basically about 30 minutes of gameplay condensed into about 4. I'll be approaching the same Warzone from 2 different routes as well, just because I can. Oh, and I will be playing this with the move, of course, on veteran difficulty and with the cursor off. By the way, when played on Elite difficulty, you get no cursor, period. You can't turn it on. Now that's hardcore. Okay, as Rico once said,
"Time to die!"
Engaging!
Permission to break formation. Negative, Raider 1. Stay in position.
okay, that was the first part of the montage. Now for the second part, going through a different route.
troops advance. Acknowledged. Armor Group 4 moving up. Good work, people. All troops advance. Acknowledged. Armor Group 4 moving up. This is Velasquez. Permission to break formation. Negative. For the Emperor!
And this is the end of it. Hope you enjoyed the demonstration. Thanks for watching. Passo e chiudo. Sorry, my bad.